My lords, it's a great pleasure to follow the noble lady Baroness Mackintosh of Pickering. Um, there's a huge amount of good in this group, and I'm going to be somewhat selective in what I cover. But I want to begin with Lord Chidgey's Amendment 241 and thank him, I'm sure, on behalf of many people in the UK for his championing of chalk streams. The noble lady Baroness Mackintosh referred to how these are held in great regard by anglers, but I think we shouldn't forget they're in great regard right across the country. And I note that just last month, the River Cam became the first UK river to have its rights declared in a special ceremony which the local group Friends of the Cam organised. At that ceremony, a version of the Universal Declaration of River Rights, drawn from Indigenous principles and river victories around the world, was read out. Now, a lawyer at that event noted that, of course, that legally this had no effect, but it did show the strength of feeling and the desire to protect the River Cam and its tributaries. And I note also that the River Frome in Somerset recently had a bylaw drawn up to offer it some protection. I think it now turns to your lordship's house to encourage the government to show a similar level of concern as we're seeing in affected communities. Moving now to the biggest group biggest group of amendments in this group, and we start with 234, also in the name of the noble Lord Chidgey, which is a classic must replace may. And we're talking here, of course, about species conservation strategies. And as other speakers have had, I will briefly focus particularly on Amendment 235, which has cross-party and non-party support, and certainly had there been space, the Green Group, who would have also attached our name to this. And I think we've already heard considerable detail about how important this is, but it really is worth reflecting that the experience of species conservation strategies thus far has been there's been a real risk on focusing on facilitating development rather than actually protecting species and, crucially, the ecosystems that are fundamental to the continued existence and importance of those species. Great Crested Newts has already been referred to, but that's just one of the cases where we've failed to see alternative, less damaging solutions considered, including on-site avoidance or mitigation of impacts. What these amendments, and particularly 235, would do is ensure that the mitigation hierarchy is always followed in species conservation strategies, and this is absolutely crucial. I'd also particularly note support for Amendment 248 in the name of the noble lord, the Earl of Caithness, and the stress on evidence is something that I think it's pretty hard to argue with. But finally, I want to take a little bit of time on Amendment 293A because the noble Lord Brown of Ladyton, whose name this appears, it also has backing from the noble Lady Baroness Parmenter, the Earl of Shrewsbury, and the noble Lady Baroness Jones of Whitchurch. The noble Lord Brown referred to this as a interloper amendment, but I think rather this is a simple, clear, effective, deliverable amendment to this bill, which really it's hard to see why the government should not accept. We've already heard a little bit about how damaging lead ammunition is. And it's worth going back to the history that nearly 6 years ago, DEFRA got the completed report of the Lead Ammunition Group, which recommended that lead ammunition be phased out. That was set up at the suggestion of the RSPB and the World Wildlife Trust. And the evidence is that when lead shot goes out into the environment, birds, particularly who feed on grain over fields, collect and eat it, and then predator and scavenger species such as crows and raptors can eat those carcasses, accumulate the lead and die. And we know how much pressure many of our raptors continue to be under with illegal persecution. It's really crucial we protect them from this unnecessary threat. And just to put a bit of scale on this, I'm indebted to Tom Cameron, who's a lecturer in aquatic community ecology from the University of Essex, who's done some calculations that if a commercial shooting estate offered a single day hunting pheasants with an expected bag of 200 birds, that might be expected to have a 1-to-3 kill ratio. Using a standard game load of 32 grams of number 5 lead shot, each cartridge containing around 248 pellets, that would be 25 kilograms of lead shot from just one day of fairly typical shooting. Now, as the academic says, you could argue to do the full calculations across the country, but to quote, it's clear that it's a lot, close quote, of lead being put out into the environment, and wholly unnecessarily. And I note also a new study published in the British Ecological Society journal People and Nature, which showed that there are, as the Noble Lord Browne referred to, significant numbers of shooters who are perfectly comfortable with the idea of moving away from lead shot. And I also compliment the Noble Lord Browne on discovering that we in your Lordship's house are protected from the risk of ingesting that lead. However, many children in our society still are not. Now, the Noble Lord Krebs referred to a study conducted last year during lockdown that showed that the voluntary phase out that was supposed to begin in February 2020 wasn't working. I think it is worth noting just a detail from that. This was pheasants bought from game dealers, butchers and supermarkets around the UK. Of 180 birds examined by the scientists, 179, all but one, had been shot with lead shot. So a year into this voluntary 5-year phase out, this clearly isn't happening. This amendment is very simple, very clear, extremely deliverable, and to come back to the word evidenced, extraordinarily well evidenced. And I really much hope that we will see the government taking action. Thank you, my lords.